Horizon Forbidden West is the 2022 sequel to Horizon Zero Dawn. It was developed by Guerrilla Games, and I mean, like, sure there's some climbing and funny movement, but I think it's a stretch, if not downright insulting, to call Aloy a gorilla. I mean, if anything, she's more like an orangutan, right? Because she's like a ginger, right? Anyway, the newest Sony flagship mascot housed from these games, as Aloy has come to represent PlayStation as a brand since Zero Dawn's release on the PS4. Zero Dawn released in 2017 and was widely heralded as one of the best games exclusive to the PlayStation 4. For the record, I don't necessarily disagree. I love Zero Dawn. I have a platinum trophy to prove it. The game is an open-world action role-playing game, which I know is a statement that covers 90% of modern AAA releases, so it doesn't really mean anything. To describe the game in terms that actually mean things though, you control Aloy as she makes her way through this post-apocalyptic open world filled with robot dinosaurs. Technology has essentially been lost at this point because, you know, post-apocalypse, so your weapons of choice are things like bows and arrows and tripwires, which is the best you people can come up with despite the futuristic fauna. As you travel through the game, you complete quests and unlock new equipment, and your knowledge of these mechanical beasts improves. You learn what they're weak to and where to aim for maximum impact, and essentially become a more competent hunter. This is basically the main gameplay loop you'll experience for the duration. I mean, sure, there's quests that make you go from point A to point B, as well as some platforming and problem solving, not unlike an Uncharted game. But yeah, for the most part, shooting robot dinosaurs with your high-tech bow and arrow is what you'll be doing for most of your time, and the sequel isn't much different. I bring up the context for the first game though because it's pretty much required reading if you want to play the second game. Forbidden West largely picks up where Zero Dawn left off, and then builds upon it as a foundation. Comparing it to the first game, the robots you defeat are tougher and take longer to kill, plus they're more aggressive as well. Aloy has a plethora of new combat options now though, maybe a bit too many, but we'll come back to that. Overall though, there's a focus on the gameplay being more difficult. Everything that wants to kill you is now better at killing you, and early on I died a whole lot because of this. As for the story of the games, there certainly is one. Look, I'll put it out there, this was a game from my backlog. I didn't play it when it came out. Actually, hold on, I did play it when it came out, for like maybe 30 minutes. I just didn't really care for the game, so I dropped it and became another entry on that life-controlling list I am cursed to complete. But I did revisit it and finish it recently. So given it's been at least a couple of years since release, plus I played Zero Dawn upon release in 2017, there's a gap of over 7 years between these two events. I bring this up because Zero Dawn's story is not fresh in my mind. I remember its story being interesting enough that I did a bunch of optional side content, but I couldn't tell you specifics. Normally with a sequel this isn't too big a deal. A lot of sequels choose to tell stories that can largely be enjoyed on their own, maybe with some references and connections to the past that reward returning players. To give you a concrete example, there was a period of time that Mass Effect, you know, the first one, was an Xbox exclusive. It's weird to think of now, but that was the case. If you had a PS3, you were just out of luck. The sequels though were both available on both consoles. I played Mass Effect 2 when it came out due to recommendations from my Xbox owning friends who insisted that it was amazing. And they were right. Mass Effect is amazing. The original trilogy is one of my absolute favourite trilogies in gaming. Mass Effect 2 though, being an RPG, relies a lot on continuing the story from Mass Effect 1. A lot of stuff happened in that game that affects the story, but honestly you don't have to know it. It's still a phenomenal experience without a lot of that context. Meeting Garrus is still an iconic moment because you can immediately tell him and Commander Shepard have a history and a chemistry. You don't need to know anything about Cerberus to get that they're a dodgy corporation and that something is off. That ridiculous tangent is to give an example of a sequel that, yeah, universally I think everyone would agree it's way better with the context of the previous game, but even without it, the story is entirely understandable and enjoyable and holds up even without context. Back to Forbidden West, and I remind you it's been over 7 years since I played the previous game, but I did play it, extensively enough to platinum trophy it, so it's not like I'm without context. I had no idea what was happening in this story at any point, I don't think, and even having just played it, I don't think I could tell you a single detail about it. Immediately you're meeting characters that are returning from the first game. I only know this though because they tell you this overtly. Aloy, long time no see. Sorry, who the hell are you again? Look, this probably is a me problem, and if you didn't have, you know, a 7-year gap between games, you might know what's happening, but I didn't. I will tell you, I had a crisis of self during this game. Not knowing who anyone was made me rethink whether I even liked the first game at all, really. Is Zero Dawn any good? Why can't I remember anything that happens in the game? I'd probably completely ignore the story though, as long as the gameplay is fun and engaging. The gameplay is fun and engaging, right? Look, this kind of game is the hardest to justify why I'm not the biggest fan of. Mind you, I cared about the game enough to beat it, just not enough to say I enjoyed it much. I've said before and I'll say it again until I die, I prefer a game that experiments and does something new even if it falls on its face, over a game that plays it safe but churns out mediocrity. Forbidden West, I think, plays it too safe. Story notwithstanding, as I'm sure maybe there is something there if you know what's happening, the core gameplay feels off. It's not very responsive. A lot of games like this these days go for this more realistic weight and impact for their characters. It's made to feel more grounded in reality. Jumps have an inertia to them, as does your running. Things like spinning on a dime or jumping with little to no wind-up look and feel unrealistic and video gamey. So instead we go for something a bit more based on what it would physically feel like. The consequence to this is, it doesn't feel good. If when you press the jump button there's a delay of 1/3 of a second before you jump, it's felt and it makes your game feel sluggish. Add to this the open world. Visually it's gorgeous, it's expansive and beautiful and crammed with things to do, people to talk to and materials to acquire, but none of it is fun to engage with. There's no reason to engage with any of it. It feels far better to just beeline to each of the story objectives, since the game is finished quicker that way. The uninteresting open worlds epidemic that plagues the gaming landscape in our post Far Cry 3 world is truly a great tragedy.
Do yourself a favor. Don't turn around. I told you not to turn around.
Even with the mounts, the world is tedious to explore, with the one exception. You get access to flying mounts in the last hour or so of the game, like it's literally right before the last quest, and it feels so good. I mean, it's too little too late at this point, but this feels way better to explore the game world with. Why couldn't I get this earlier? I don't care if it breaks progression or whatever, just let me have it. And then the combat. The combat honestly feels even more tedious sometimes. They've upped the difficulty of the fights from the first game, as I mentioned before, making the machines faster, more aggressive, and take longer to kill. This makes combat drag on, especially when they can kill your character with only 1 or 2 good hits. They've added a lot more in the way of weapons, increasing the depth of the combat, but doing so in a way that feels tiring, I guess. There's so many weapon options, many of them being incredibly niche or specific, making everything just feel a bit bloated. It's a bloated world with a bloated story and bloated combat. All of it makes me rethink everything about the first game. Did I even like it? Is the game actually bad and we just didn't know better in 2017? It made me jump back and play a little bit of Zero Dawn, just to make sure. And guess what? I was right. Aloy feels way more responsive to control in this game. Between her rolling and her jumping, she's responsive and generally feels good. The time to kill is way more reasonable with the enemies, preventing combat from becoming this exhausting war of attrition. I will admit, the melee combat feels way worse in Zero Dawn than in Forbidden West, but melee, outside of the human enemies in Forbidden West, was never a very good combat option to begin with. I'd prefer the shooting feel better, and frankly it does in Zero Dawn. With fewer unnecessary weapons bloating up your weapon wheel, you can focus on the tools of yours that actually work, resulting in a far more fun experience. By throwing so much into Forbidden West, the game frankly feels like they made a step back from the first game in that they made the base game feel worse to play, which is a shame. Forbidden West came out 5 years after Zero Dawn, right? And in that time, I feel like they've advanced the game, advanced the gameplay, but did so by making it feel like a lot of the other open world AAA games out there, and it's exhausting playing them sometimes. You need to collect materials while in the world because, of course you do, which means pressing a button regularly as you run past things. These materials are used in crafting, because of course they are. You collect machine parts with different rarities and drop rates, and some things need to be shot off to be collected undamaged, which admittedly, that part is cool, I can admit when they do something right. But all this collecting drops is in service of upgrading your equipment, because of course it is. There's skill trees, because of course there is. I know all of this is still in the first game, but it was tuned in a way back then that it served the experience. But in the sequel, there's more of all of it now, because of course there is. More equipment, more drops, more skill trees, because there must be more in the sequel, and by tuning those dials too far into the direction of tedium, they've hurt the base game experience. And not even going to talk about the weird robot chess game. I don't know why it's in the game. It again just bloats an already balloon-shaped game. It feels unfocused, and by trying to densely cram as much as they can into this game, it makes it a more tiring experience if you want to finish it. Final boss was cool though.
Feeling a decent 2 strong 6 on this one.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you've played Horizon Forbidden West and what you thought of it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you want to see me continue making content like this, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.